Chapter 7. The children, gathered in a ring around the wandering storyteller Strybog, showed their disapproval by making a dreadful, riotous uproar. Finally, Connor, the blacksmith's son, the oldest, strongest and bravest of the children, and also the one who brought the storyteller a pot full of cabbage soup and potatoes sprinkled with scraps of fried bacon, stepped forward as the spokesman and exponent of the general opinion.
"How's that?" he yelled. "What do you mean, that's your lot? Is it fair to end the tale there? To leave us hungry for more? We want to know what happened next. We can't wait till you visit our village again, for it might be in 6 months, or a whole year. Go on with the story."
"The sun's gone down," the old man replied. "It's time for bed, young uns. When you start to yawn and grumble over your chores tomorrow, what will your parents say? I know what they'll say. Old Strybog was telling them tales till past midnight, wearying the children's heads with songs, and didn't let them get to bed. So when he wends his way to the village again, don't give him nothing. No kasha, no dumplings, no bacon. Just drive him off, the old gimmer, because nothing comes from his tales but woe and trouble."
"They won't say that," the children all shouted. "Tell us more, please."
The old man mumbled, looking at the sun disappearing behind the treetops on the far bank of the Yaruga.
"Very well, then. But here's the bargain. One of you's to hurry over to the cottage and fetch some buttermilk for me to moisten my throat. The rest of you, meanwhile, are to decide whose story I'll tell, for I shan't tell everyone's tale today, even were I to spin yarns till morning. You have to decide who do I tell of now and who another time."
The children began to yell again, each trying to outshout the others.
"Silence!"
Strybog roared, brandishing his stick.
"I told you to choose, not shriek like jays. Skak, skak, skak. What'll it be? Whose story shall I tell?"
"Yennefer's,"
Nimue squeaked. She was the youngest in the audience, nicknamed Squirt, owing to her height, and was stroking a kitten that was asleep on her lap.
"Tell us what happened to the sorceress afterwards. How she used magic to flee from the coven on Bald Mountain to rescue Ciri. I'd love to hear that. I want to be a sorceress when I grow up." "No chance," shouted Bronick, the miller's son. "Wipe your nose first, Squirt. They don't take snot noses for sorcerers' apprentices. And you, old man, don't talk about Yennefer, but about Ciri and the rats when they went to robbing and beat up—"
"Quiet," Connor said, glum and pensive. "You're all stupid, and that's that. If we're to hear one thing more tonight, let there be some order. Tell us about the Witcher and his band, when the company set off from the Yaruga."
"I want to hear about Yennefer,"
Nimue squealed.
"Me too,"
Orla, her elder sister, joined in.
"I want to hear about her love for the Witcher, how they doted on each other. But be sure it's a happy ending, not about fighting, oh no."
"Quiet, you silly thing. Who cares about love? We want war and fighting.
"And the Witcher's sword."
"No, Ciri and the rats." "Shut your traps," Connor said, and looked around fiercely, "or I'll get a stick and give you a thrashing, you little snots. I said, let there be some order. Let him carry on about the Witcher when he was travelling with Dandelion and Milver."
"Yes,"
Nimue squealed again.
"I want to hear about Milver, because if the sorceresses don't take me, I'm going to be an archer."
"So we've decided," Connor said. Look at him, nodding, nose dipping like a corncrake's. "Hey, old man, wake up. Tell us about the Witcher, about Geralt the Witcher, I mean, when he formed his fellowship on the bank of the Yaruga." "But first," Bronick interrupted, "to salve our curiosity, tell us a little about the others, about what happened to them. Then it'll be easier for us to wait till you come back and continue the story. Just a little about Yennefer and Ciri. Please."
"Yennefer," Strybog giggled, "flew from the enchanted castle which was called Bald Mountain using a spell, and she plopped straight into the ocean, into the rough seas among cruel rocks. But don't be afeard, it was a trifle for the enchantress. She didn't drown. She landed up on the Skellige Islands and found allies there. For you must know that a great fury arose in her against the wizard Vilgefortz. Convinced he had kidnapped Ciri, she vowed to track him down, exact a terrible vengeance, and free Ciri. And that's that. I'll tell you more another time."
"And Ciri?"
"Ciri was still prowling with the rats, calling herself Folka. She had gained a taste for the robber's life, for though no one knew it then, There was fury and cruelty in that girl. The worst of everything that hides in a person emerged from her and slowly got the upper hand. Oh, the witches of Caer Moran made a great mistake by teaching her how to kill, and Ciri herself, dealing out death, didn't even suspect that the grim Reaper was hot on her tail, for the terrible Bonhart was tracking her, hunting her. The meeting of these two, Bonhart and Ciri, was meant to be, but I shall recount their tale another time, for tonight you shall hear the tale of the Witcher. The children calmed down and crowded around the old man in a tight circle. They listened. Night was falling. The hemp shrubs, the raspberry bushes and hollyhocks growing near the cottage, friendly during the day, were suddenly transformed into an extraordinary, sinister forest. What was rustling there? Was it a mouse, or a terrible fiery-eyed elf, or perhaps a strigger, or a witch hungry for children's flesh? Was it an ox stamping in the cowshed, or the hooves of cruel invaders' war horses crossing the Yaruga as they had a century before? Was that a nightjar flitting above the thatched roof, or perhaps a vampire thirsty for blood? Or perhaps a beautiful sorceress flying towards the distant sea with the aid of a magic spell? Geralt the Witcher, the storyteller began, set out with his company towards the bogs and forests of Angrin. And you must know that in those days there were truly wild forests in Angrin. Oh my, not like now. There aren't any forests like that left, unless in Brokilon. The company trekked eastwards up the Yaruga towards the wildernesses of the Black Forest. Things went well at first, but later, oh my, you'll learn what happened later. The tale of long past forgotten times unravelled and flowed, and the children listened. The Witcher sat on a log at the top of a cliff, from which unfolded a view over the wetlands and reed beds lining the bank of the Yaruga. The sun was sinking. Cranes soared up from the marshes, whooping, flying in a skein. Everything's gone to pot, the Witcher thought, looking at the ruins of a woodman's shack and the thin ribbon of smoke rising from Milva's campfire. Everything's fallen through, and it was going so well. My companions were strange, but at least they stood by me. We had a goal to achieve, close at hand, realistic, defined. Eastwards through Angren, towards Caed-Du. It was going pretty well, but it had to get fucked up. Was it bad luck? Or fate? The cranes sounded their bugle call. Emil Regis Rohetlek Tertiev Godefroy led the way riding a Nilfgaardian bay captured by the Witcher near Armeria. The horse, although at first somewhat tetchy with the vampire and his herby smell, quickly became accustomed to him and didn't cause any more problems than Roach, who was walking alongside and was capable of bucking wildly if stung by a horsefly. Dandelion followed behind Regis and Geralt on Pegasus, with a bandaged head and a warlike mien. As he rode, the poet composed a heroic ballad, in whose melody and rhymes could be heard his recollections of their recent adventures. The song clearly implied that the author and performer had been the bravest of the brave during the adventures. Milva and Caer Maodaifrin ep Ciailach brought up the rear. Caer was riding his recovered chestnut, pulling the grey laden with some of their modest accoutrements. They finally left the riverside marshes, heading towards higher and drier hilly terrain from which they could see the sparkling ribbon of the great Yaruga to the south, and to the north the high rocky approaches to the distant Mahakam Massif. The weather was splendid, the sun was warm, and the mosquitoes had stopped biting and buzzing around their ears. Their boots and trousers had dried out. On the sunny slope, brambles were black with fruit, and the horses found grass to eat. The streams tumbling down from the hills flowed with crystal-clear water and were full of trout. When night fell, they were able to make a fire and even lie beside it. In short, everything was wonderful, and their moods ought to have improved right away. But they didn't. The reason why became apparent at one of the first camps. "Wait a moment, Geralt," the poet began, looking around and clearing his throat. "Don't rush back to the camp. Milva and I would like to talk to you in private. It's about
Regis. Ah, the Witcher said, laying a handful of brushwood on the ground. So now you're afraid. It's a bit late for that. Stop that, Dandelion said with a grimace. We've accepted him as a companion. He's offered to help us search for Ciri. He saved my neck from the noose, which I shall never forget. But hell's bells, we are feeling something like fear. Does that surprise you? You've spent your entire life hunting and killing his like. I did not kill him, and I'm not planning to. Does that declaration suffice? If it doesn't, even though my heart's brimming with sorrow for you, I can't cure you of your anxieties. Paradoxically, Regis is the only one among us capable of curing anything. Stop that, the troubadour repeated, annoyed. You aren't talking to Yennefer. You can drop the tortuous eloquence. Give us a simple answer to a simple question. Then ask it without any tortuous eloquence. Regis is a vampire. It's no secret what vampires feed on. What will happen when he gets seriously hungry? Yes, we saw him eating fish soup, and since then he's been eating and drinking with us as normal as anyone, but will he be able to control his craving? Geralt, do I have to spell it out to you? He controlled his bloodlust when gore was pouring from your head. He didn't even lick his fingers after he'd finished applying the dressing. And during the full moon, when we'd been drinking his mandrake moonshine and were sleeping in his shack, he had the perfect opportunity to get his hands on us. Have you checked for puncture marks on your swan-like neck? Don't take the piss, Witcher, Milva growled. You know more about vampires than we do. You're mocking Dandelion, so tell me. I was raised in the forest. I didn't go to school. I'm ignorant. But it's no fault of mine. It's not right to mock. I'm ashamed to say I'm also a bit afraid of Regis. Not unreasonably, Geralt said, nodding. He's a so-called higher vampire. He's extremely dangerous. Were he our enemy, I'd be afraid of him too. But, bloody hell, for reasons unknown to me, he's our companion. Right now, he's leading us to Kaidu, to the Druids, who may be able to help me get information about Ciri. I'm desperate, so I want to seize the chance and certainly not give up on it, which is why I've agreed to his vampiric company. Only because of that? No, he answered, with a trace of reluctance. Then he finally decided to be frank. Not just that. He behaves decently. He didn't hesitate to act during that girl's trial at the camp by the Chotler, although he knew it would unmask him. He took that red-hot horseshoe from the fire, Dandelion recalled. Why, he held it in his hand for a good few seconds without even flinching. None of us would be able to repeat that trick, not even with a roast potato. He's invulnerable to fire. What else is he capable of? He can become invisible if he wishes. He can bewitch with his gaze and put someone in a deep sleep. He did that to the guards in Visegerd's camp. He can assume the form of a bat and fly. I presume he can only do those things at night during a full moon, but I could be wrong. He's already surprised me a few times, so he might still have something up his sleeve. I suspect he's quite remarkable even among vampires. He imitates humans perfectly and has done so for years. He baffles horses and dogs, which can sense his true nature, using the smell of the herbs he keeps with him at all times. Though my medallion doesn't react to him either, and it ought to. I tell you, he defies easy classification. Talk to him if you want to know more. He's our companion. There shall be nothing left unsaid between us, particularly not mutual mistrust or fear. Let's get back to the camp. Help me with this brushwood. Geralt? Yes, Dandelion. And I'm asking purely theoretically, if I don't know, the Witcher replied honestly and frankly. I don't know if I'd be capable of killing him. I truly would prefer not to be forced to try. Dandelion took the Witcher's advice to heart, deciding to clear up the uncertainty and dispel their doubts. He began as soon as they set off, with his usual tact. Milva, he suddenly called as they were riding, sneaking a glance at the vampire. Why don't you ride on ahead with your bow and bring down a fawn or wild boar? I've had enough of damned blackberries and mushrooms, fish and mussels. I fancy eating a hunk of real meat for a change. How about you, Regis? I beg your pardon, the vampire said, lifting his head from the horse's neck. Meat, the poet repeated emphatically. I'm trying to persuade Milva to go hunting. fancy some fresh meat?
Yes, I do.
And blood. Would you like some fresh blood?
Blood? Regis asked, swallowing. No, I'll decline the blood. But if you have a taste for some, feel free.
Geralt, Milva and Caer observed an awkward, sepulchral silence.
I know what this is about, Dandelion, Regis said slowly, and let me reassure you. I'm a vampire, but I don't drink blood.
The silence became as heavy as lead. But Dandelion wouldn't have been Dandelion if he had remained silent.
You must have misunderstood me, he said, seemingly light-heartedly. I didn't mean I don't drink blood, Regis interrupted. Haven't for many years. I gave it up.
What do you mean, gave it up?
Just that. I really don't understand. Forgive me. It's a personal matter.
But Dandelion, the Witcher burst out, turning around in the saddle. Regis just told you to fuck off. He just said it more politely. Be so good as to shut your trap. However, the seeds of anxiety and doubts that had been sown now germinated and sprouted. When they stopped for the night, the ambience was still heavy and tense, which even Milva shooting down a plump barnacle goose by the river couldn't relieve. They covered the catch in clay, roasted and ate it, gnawing even the tiniest bones clean. They had sated their hunger, but the anxiety remained. The conversation was awkward, despite Dandelion's titanic efforts. The poet's chatter became a monologue, so obviously apparent that even he finally noticed it and stopped talking. Only the sound of the horses crunching their hay disturbed the deathly silence around the campfire. In spite of the late hour, no one seemed to be getting ready for bed. Milva was boiling water in a pot above the fire and straightening the crumpled fletchings of her arrows in the steam. Caer was repairing a torn boot buckle. Geralt was whittling a piece of wood, and Regis swept his eyes over all of them in turn.
Very well, he said at last. I see it is inevitable. It would appear I ought to have explained a few things to you long ago.
No one expects it of you, Geralt said. He threw the stick he had been lengthily and enthusiastically carving into the fire and looked up. I don't need explanations. I'm the old-fashioned type. When I hold my hand out to someone and accept him as a comrade, it means more to me than a contract signed in the presence of a notary. I'm old-fashioned too, Caer said, still bent over his boot. I don't know any other custom, Milva said dryly, placing another arrow in the steam rising up from the pot. Don't worry about Dandelion's chatter, the Witcher added. He can't help it, and you don't have to confide in us or explain anything. We haven't confided in you either.
I nonetheless think, the vampire smiled faintly, that you'd like to hear what I have to say, even though no one's forcing you to. I feel the need for openness towards the individuals I extend a hand to and accept as my comrades.
This time, no one said anything.
I ought to begin by saying, Regis said a moment later, that all fears linked to my vampiric nature are groundless. I won't attack anybody, nor will I creep around at night trying to sink my teeth into somebody's neck. And this does not merely concern my comrades, to whom my relationship is no less old-fashioned than theirs is to me. I don't touch blood, not at all and never. I stopped drinking it when it became a problem for me, a serious problem which I had difficulty solving. In fact, the problem arose and acquired negative characteristics in true textbook style, he continued a moment later. Even during my youth I enjoyed the pleasures of good company, in which respect I was no different to the majority of my peers. You know what it's like, you were young too. With humans, however, there exists a system of rules and restrictions, parental authority, guardians, superiors and elders, morals, ultimately. We have nothing like that. Youngsters have complete freedom and exploit it. They create their own patterns of behaviour, stupid ones, you understand. It's real, youthful foolishness. Don't fancy a drink, and you call yourself a vampire? He doesn't drink. Don't invite him, he'll spoil the party. I didn't want to spoil the party, and the thought of losing social approval terrified me. So I partied. Revelries and frolics, shindigs and booze-ups. Every full moon we'd fly to a village and drink from anyone we found. The foulest, the worst class of, fluid. It made no difference to us whose it was, as long as there was, hemoglobin. It can't be a party without blood, after all. And I was terribly shy with vampire girls, too, until I'd had a drop. Regis fell silent, lost in thought. No one responded. Geralt felt a terrible urge to have a drink himself. It got rowdier and rowdier, the vampire continued, and worse as time went on. Occasionally I went on such benders that I didn't return to the crypt for 3 or 4 nights in a row. A tiny amount of fluid, and I lost control, which, of course, didn't stop me from continuing the party. My friends? Well, you know what they're like. Some of them tried to make me see reason, so I took offence. Others were a bad influence and dragged me out of the crypt to revels. Why, they even set me up with playthings, and they enjoyed themselves at my expense. Milva, still busy restoring her arrow's flattened fletchings, murmured angrily. Gaia had finished repairing his boot and seemed to be asleep. Later on, Regis continued, more alarming symptoms appeared. Parties and company began to play an absolutely secondary role. I noticed I could manage without them. Blood was all I needed, was all that mattered, even when it was, "Just you and your shadow?" Dandelion interjected. "Worse than that," Regis answered calmly. "I don't even cast one." He was silent for a while. Then I met a special vampire girl. It might have been, I think it was, serious. I settled down, but not for long. She left me. So I began to double my intake. Despair and grief, as you know, are perfect excuses. Everyone thinks they understand. Even I thought I understood, but I was merely applying theory to practice. Am I boring you? I'll try to make it short. I finally began to do absolutely unacceptable things, the kind of things no vampire does. I flew under the influence. One night the boys sent me to the village to fetch some blood, and I missed my target, a girl who was walking to the well. I smashed straight into the well at top speed. The villagers almost beat me to death, but fortunately they didn't know how to go about it. They punctured me with stakes, chopped my head off, poured holy water all over me, and buried me. Can you imagine how I felt when I woke up? "We can," Milva said, examining an arrow. Everyone looked at her strangely. The archer coughed and looked away. Regis smiled faintly. "I won't be long now," he said. "In the grave I had plenty of time to rethink things." "Plenty?" Geralt asked. "How much?" Regis looked at him. "Professional curiosity? Around 50 years. After I'd regenerated, I decided to pull myself together. It wasn't easy, but I did it. And I haven't drunk since." "Not at all," Dandelion said and stuttered, but his curiosity got the better of him. "Not at all? Never? But—" "Dandelion," Geralt said, slightly raising his eyebrows, "get a grip and think. In silence." "I beg your pardon," the poet grunted. "Don't apologize," the vampire said placatingly. "And, Geralt, don't chasten him. I understand his curiosity. By which I mean I and my myth personify all his human fears. One cannot expect a human to rid himself of them. Fear plays a no less important role in the human psyche than all the other emotions. A psyche without fears would be crippled." "But," Dandelion said, regaining his poise, "you don't frighten me. Does that make me a cripple?" For a moment, Geralt expected Regis to show his fangs and cure Dandelion of his supposed disability. But he was wrong.
The vampire wasn't inclined towards theatrical gestures.
I was talking about fears deeply lodged in the consciousness and the subconscious, he explained calmly. Please don't be hurt by this metaphor. But a crow isn't afraid of a hat and coat hung on a stick after it has overcome that fear and alighted on them. But when the wind jerks the scarecrow, the bird flees.
The crow's behaviour might be seen as a struggle for life, Kaia observed from the darkness. Struggle, schmuggle, Milver snorted. The crow isn't afraid of the scarecrow. It's afraid of men, because men throw stones and shoot at it. A struggle for life, Geralt nodded, but in human, not Corvine terms. Thank you for the explanation, Regis. We accept it wholeheartedly, but don't go rooting about in the depths of the human subconscious. Milver's right. The reasons people react in panic-stricken horror at the sight of a thirsty vampire aren't irrational. They are a result of the will to survive.
Thus speaks an expert, the vampire said, bowing slightly towards him. An expert whose professional pride would not allow him to take money for fighting imaginary fears. The self-respecting witcher who only hires himself out to fight real, unequivocally dangerous evil. This professional will probably want to explain why a vampire is a greater threat than a dragon or a wolf. They have fangs too, don't forget. Perhaps because the latter two use their fangs to stave off hunger or in self-defence, but never for fun, or for breaking the ice or overcoming shyness towards the opposite sex.
People know nothing about that, riposted Regis.
You have known it for some time, but the rest of our company have only just discovered the truth. The remaining majority are deeply convinced that vampires do not drink for fun, but feed on blood and nothing but blood. Needless to say, human blood. Blood is a life-giving fluid. Its loss results in the weakening of the body, the seeping away of a vital force. You reason thus. A creature that spills our blood is our deadly enemy, and a creature that attacks us for our blood because it lives on it is doubly evil. It grows in vital force at the expense of ours. For its species to thrive, ours must fade away. Ultimately, a creature like that is repellent to you humans, for although you are aware of blood's life-giving qualities, it is disgusting to you. Would any of you drink blood? I doubt it. And there are people who grow weak or even faint at the sight of blood. In some societies, women are considered unclean for a few days every month, and they are isolated.
Among savages, perhaps, Kaia interrupted, and I think only Nordlings grow faint at the sight of blood. We've strayed, the Witcher said, looking up. We've deviated from a straight path into a tangle of dubious philosophy. Do you think, Regis, that it would make a difference to humans were they to know you don't treat them as prey, but as a watering hole? Where do you see the irrationality of fears here? Vampires drink human blood. That particular fact cannot be challenged. A human treated by a vampire as a demijohn of vodka loses his strength. That's also clear. A totally drained human, so to speak, loses his vitality definitively. He dies. Forgive me, but the fear of death can't be lumped together with an aversion to blood, menstrual or otherwise. Your talk's so clever it makes my head spin, Milver snorted. And all your wisdom comes down to what's under a woman's skirt. Woeful philosophers.
Let's cast aside the symbolism of blood for a moment, Regis said, for here the myths really do have certain grounds in facts. Let's focus on those universally accepted myths with no grounds in fact. After all, everyone knows that if someone is bitten by a vampire and survives, they must become a vampire themselves, right?
Right, Dandelion said.
There's even a ballad. Do you understand basic arithmetic?
I've studied all 7 liberal arts, and was awarded degrees summa cum laude.
After the conjunction of the spheres, there remained approximately 1,200 higher vampires in your world. The number of teetotalers, because there is a considerable number of them, balances the number who drink excessively, as I did in my day. Generally, the statistical average vampire drinks during every full moon, for the full moon is a holy day for us, which we usually, celebrate with a drink. Applying the matter to the human calendar, and assuming there are 12 full moons a year, gives us the theoretical sum of 14,400 humans bitten annually. Since the conjunction, once again calculating according to your reckoning, 1,500 years have passed. A simple calculation will show that at the present moment 21,600,000 vampires ought to exist in the world. If that figure is augmented by exponential growth...
That'll do, Dandelion sighed. I don't have an abacus, but I can imagine the number. Actually, I can't imagine it. And you're saying that infection from a bite is nonsense and a fabrication?
Thank you, Regis said, bowing. Let's move on to the next myth, which states that a vampire is a human being who has died, but not completely. He doesn't rot or crumble to dust in the grave. He lies there as fresh as a daisy and ruddy-faced, ready to go forth and bite a victim. Where does that myth come from, if not from your subconscious and irrational aversion to your dearly departed? You surround the dead with veneration and memory. You dream of immortality, and in your myths and legends there's always someone being resurrected, conquering death. But were your esteemed late great-grandfather really to suddenly arise from the grave and order a beer, panic would ensue. And it doesn't surprise me. Organic matter, in which the vital processes have ceased, succumbs to degradation, which manifests itself very unpleasantly. The corpse stinks and dissolves into slime. The immortal soul, an indispensable element of your myths, abandons the stinking carcass in disgust and spirits away, forgive the pun. The soul is pure, and one can easily venerate it. But then you invented a revolting kind of spirit which doesn't soar, doesn't abandon the cadaver. Why? It doesn't even stink. That's repulsive and unnatural. For you, the living dead is the most revolting of revolting anomalies. Some moron even coined the term the undead, which you're ever so keen to bestow on us. Humans, Geralt said, smiling slightly, are a primitive and superstitious race. They find it difficult to fully understand and appropriately name a creature that resurrects, even though it's had stakes pushed through it, had its head removed and been buried in the ground for 50 years. Yes, indeed, said the vampire, impervious to the derision. Your mutated race is capable of regenerating its fingernails, toenails, hair, and epidermis, but is unable to accept the fact that other races are more advanced in that respect. That inability is not the result of your primitiveness, quite the opposite. It's a result of egotism and a conviction in your own perfection. Anything that is more perfect than you must be a repulsive aberration, and repulsive aberrations are consigned to myths for sociological reasons.
I don't understand fuck all, Milva announced calmly, brushing the hair from her forehead with an arrow tip. I hear you talking about fairy tales, and even I know fairy tales, though I'm a foolish wench from the forest. So it astonishes me that you aren't afraid of the sun, Regis. In fairy tales, sunlight burns a vampire to ash. Should I lump it together with the other fairy tales?
Of course you should, Regis confirmed. You believe a vampire is only dangerous at night, that the first rays of the sun turn him into ash. At the root of this myth, invented around primeval campfires, lies your heliophilia, by which I mean love of warmth, the circadian rhythm which relies upon diurnal activity. For you, the night is cold, dark, sinister, menacing, and full of danger. The sunrise, however, represents another victory in the fight for life, a new day, the continuation of existence. Sunlight carries with it light and the sun's rays, which are invigorating for you, bring with them the destruction of hostile monsters. A vampire turns to ash, a troll succumbs to petrifaction, a werewolf turns back into a human, and a goblin flees covering his eyes. Nocturnal predators return to their lairs and cease to be a threat. The world belongs to you until sunset. I repeat and stress, this myth arose around ancient campfires. Today it is only a myth, for now you light and heat your dwelling places. Even though you are still governed by the solar rhythm, you have managed to appropriate the night. We higher vampires have also moved some way from our primeval crypts. We have appropriated the day. The analogy is complete. Does this explanation satisfy you, my dear Milva?
Not in the slightest, the archer replied, throwing the arrow away. But I think I've got it. I'm learning. I'll be learned one day. Sociolation, petrificology, werewolfation, crapology. In schools they lecture and birch you. It's more pleasant learning with you lot. My head hurts a bit, but my arse is still in one piece. One thing is beyond question and is easy to observe, Dandelion said. The sun's rays don't turn you into ash, Regis. The sun's warmth has as much effect on you as that red-hot horseshoe you so nimbly removed from the fire with your bare hands. Returning, however, to your analogies, for us humans, the day will always remain the natural time for activity and the night the natural time for rest. That is our physical structure. During the day, for example, we see better than at night, except Geralt, who sees just as well at all times, but he's a mutant. Was it also a question of mutation among vampires? One could call it that, Regis agreed, although I would argue that when mutation is spread over a sufficiently long period, it ceases to be mutation and becomes evolution. But what you said about physical structure is out. Adapting to sunlight was an unpleasant necessity for us. In order to survive, we had to become like humans in that respect. Mimicry, I'd call it, which had its consequences. To use a metaphor, we lay down in the sick man's bed. I beg your pardon? There are reasons to believe that sunlight is lethal in the long run. There's a theory that in about 5,000 years, at a conservative estimate, this world will only be inhabited by lunar creatures, which are active at night. I'm glad I won't be around that long, Kaia sighed, then yawned widely. I don't know about you, but the intensive diurnal activity is reminding me of the need for nocturnal sleep. Me too, the Witcher said, stretching. And there are only a few hours left until the dawning of the murderous sun. But before sleep overcomes us, Regis, in the name of science and the spread of knowledge, puncture some other myths about vampirism, because I bet you've still got at least one. Indeed, the vampire nodded. I have one more. It's the last, but in no sense any less important. It is the myth behind your sexual phobias. Kaia snorted softly. I left this myth until the end, Regis said, looking him up and down. I would have tactfully passed over it, but since Geralt has challenged me, I won't spare you. Humans are most powerfully influenced by fears with a sexual origin. The virgin fainting in the embrace of a vampire who drinks her blood. The young man falling prey to the vile practices of a female vampire running her lips over his body. Well, that's how you imagine it. Oral rape. Vampires paralyze their victims with fear and force them to have oral sex, or rather a revolting parody of oral sex. And there is something disgusting about sex like that, which, after all, rules out procreation. Speak for yourself, the Witcher muttered. An act crowned not by procreation, but by sensual delight and death, Regis continued. You have turned it into a baleful myth. You unconsciously dream of something like it, but shy away from offering it to your lovers. So it's done for you by the mythological vampire, who as a result swells to become a fascinating symbol of evil. Didn't I say it? Milva yelled, as soon as Dandelion had finished explaining to her what Regis had been talking about. It's all they ever have on their minds. It starts off brainy, but always comes back to humping. The distant trumpeting of cranes slowly died away. The next day, the Witcher recalled, we set off in much better humour. And then, utterly unexpectedly, war caught up with us again. They travelled through a practically deserted and strategically unimportant country, covered in huge, dense forests, unappealing to invaders. Although Niflgaard was close at last, and they were only separated from the imperial lands by the broad waters of the Great Yaruga, it was difficult terrain to cover. Their astonishment was all the greater because of that. War appeared in a less spectacular way than it had in Brugge and Sodden, where the horizon had glowed with fires at night, and during the day columns of black smoke had slashed the blue sky. It was not so picturesque here in Angren. It was much worse. They suddenly saw a murder of crows circling over the forest with a horrible cawing, and soon after they happened upon some corpses. Although the bodies had been stripped of their clothing and were impossible to identify,
They bore the infallible and clear marks of violent death. Those people had been killed in combat, and not just killed. Most of the corpses were lying in the undergrowth, but some, cruelly mutilated, hung from trees by their arms or legs, lay sprawled on burnt-out pyres, or were impaled on stakes. And they stank. The whole of Angren had suddenly begun to reek with the monstrous, repulsive stench of barbarity. It wasn't long before they had to hide in ravines and thick undergrowth, for to their left and right, and in front and behind them, the earth shook with cavalry horses' hooves, and more units passed their hideout, stirring up dust.
"Once again," Dandelion said, shaking his head, "once again we don't know who's fighting who and why. Once again we don't know who's behind us or who's ahead of us or what direction they're headed, who's attacking and who's retreating. The pox take it all. I don't know if I've ever told you, but I see it like this. War is no different to a whorehouse with a fire raging through it."
"You have," Geralt interrupted, 100 times.
"What are they fighting over?" the poet asked, spitting violently. "Juniper bushes and sand? I mean, this exquisite country hasn't got anything else to offer."
"There were elves among the bodies in the bushes," Milva said. "Scoia'tael commandos march this way. They always have. This is the route volunteers from Dol Blatana and the Blue Mountains take when they head for Temeria. Someone wants to block their path. That's what I think."
"It's likely," Regis admitted, "that the Temerian army would try to ambush the squirrels here, but I'd say there are too many soldiers in the area. I surmise the Nilfgaardians have crossed the Yaruga."
"I surmise the same," the Witcher said, grimacing a little, as he looked at Kair's stony countenance. "The bodies we saw this morning carried the marks of Nilfgaardian combat methods."
"They're all as bad as each other," Milva snapped, unexpectedly taking the side of the young Nilfgaardian. "And don't look daggers at Cair, because now you're bound by the same bizarre fate. He dies if he falls into the Black's clutches, and you escaped a Temerian noose a while back. So it's no use trying to find out which army's in front of us and which behind, who are our comrades and who are our enemies, who's good and who's evil. Now they're all our common foes, no matter what colours they're wearing."
"You're right."
"Strange," Dandelion said, when the next day they had to hide in another ravine and wait for another cavalcade to pass. "The army are rumbling over the hills, and yet woodmen are felling trees by the Yaruga as if nothing was happening. Can you hear it?"
"Perhaps they aren't woodmen," Cair wondered. "Perhaps it's the army and their sappers."
"No, they're woodmen," Regis said. "It's clear nothing is capable of interrupting the mining of Angren gold."
"What gold?"
"Take a closer look at those trees," the vampire said, once again assuming the tone of an all-knowing, patronizing sage, instructing mere mortals or the simple-minded. He often acquired that tone, which Geralt found somewhat irritating. "Those trees," Regis repeated, "are cedars, sycamores, and Angren pines. Very valuable material. There are timber ports all around here, from which logs are floated downstream. They're felling trees everywhere, and axes are thudding away day and night. The war we can see and hear is beginning to make sense. Nilfgaard, as you know, has captured the mouth of the Yaruga, Cintra and Verden, as well as Upper Sodden. At this moment, probably also Brugge and part of Lower Sodden. That means that the timber being floated from Angren is already supplying the imperial sawmills and shipyards. The northern kingdoms are trying to halt the process, while the Nilfgaardians, on the contrary, want to fell and float as much as possible. And we, as usual, have found ourselves in a tight spot," Dandelion said, nodding. "Seeing as we have to get to Kai-Du, right through the very centre of Angren in this timber war. Isn't there another bloody way?"
"I asked Regis the same question," the Witcher recalled, staring at the sun setting over the Yaruga. As soon as the thudding of hooves had faded into the distance, things had calmed down, and we were finally able to continue our journey.
"Another way to Kai-Du," the vampire pondered, "which avoids the hills and keeps out of the soldiers' way? Indeed, there is such a way. Not very comfortable and not very safe, and it's longer too, but I guarantee we won't meet any soldiers there."
"Go on."
"We can turn south and try to get across a low point in one of the Yaruga's meanders, across Ysgith.
Do you know Ysgith, Witcher? Yes. Have you ever ridden through those forests? Of course. The calm in your voice, the vampire said, clearing his throat, would seem to signify you accept the idea. Well, there are 5 of us, including a witcher, a warrior, and an archer. Experience, 2 swords, and a bow. Too little to take on an Nilfgaardian raiding party, but it ought to be sufficient for Ysgith. Ysgith, the witcher thought. More than 30 square miles of bogs and mud, dotted with tarns, and murky forests full of weird trees dividing up the bogs. Some have trunks covered in scales. At the base they're as bulbous as onions, thinning towards the top, ending in dense, flat crowns. Others are low and misshapen, crouching on piles of roots twisted like octopuses, with beards of moss and shriveled bog lichen hanging on their bare branches. Those beards sway, not from the wind though, but from poisonous swamp gas. Ysgith means mudhole. Stinkhole would be more appropriate. And the mud and bogs, the tarns and lakes overgrown with duckweed and pondweed, teem with life. Ysgith isn't just inhabited by beavers, frogs, tortoises and waterbirds. It is swarming with much more dangerous creatures, armed with pincers, tentacles and prehensile limbs, which they use to catch, mutilate, drown and tear apart their prey. There are so many of these creatures that no one has ever been able to identify and classify them all, not even witches. Geralt himself had rarely hunted in Ysgith, and never in Lower Angrin. The land was sparsely populated, and the few humans who lived on the fringes of the bogs were accustomed to treating the monsters as part of the landscape. They kept their distance, but it rarely occurred to them to hire a witcher to exterminate the monstrosities. Rarely, however, did not mean never, so Geralt knew Ysgith and its dangers. 2 swords and a bow, he thought, and experience, my witcher's expertise. We ought to manage in a group, especially when I'll be riding in the vanguard and keeping close watch and everything. On the rotten tree trunks, piles of weed, scrub, tussocks of grass, and the plants, orchids included. For in Ysgith, even the orchids sometimes only look like plants, but are actually venomous crab spiders. I'll have to keep Dandelion on a short leash and make sure he doesn't touch anything, particularly since there's no shortage of plant life which likes to supplement its chlorophyll diet with morsels of meat. Plants whose shoots are as deadly as a crab spider's venom when they come into contact with skin. And the gas, of course, not to mention poisonous fumes. We shall have to find a way to cover our mouths and noses. Well, Regis asked, pulling him out of his reverie. Do you accept the plan? Yes, I do. Let's go. Something finally prompted me, the witcher recalled, not to talk to the rest of the company about the plan to cross Ysgith, and to ask Regis not to mention it either. I don't know why I was reluctant. Today, when everything is absolutely and totally screwed up, I might claim to have been aware of Milva's behaviour, of the problems she was having, of her obvious symptoms. But it wouldn't be true. I didn't notice anything, and what I did notice I ignored, like a blockhead. So, we continued eastwards, reluctant to turn towards the bogs. On the other hand, it was good that we lingered, he thought, drawing his sword and running his thumb over the razor-sharp blade. Had we headed straight for Ysgith then, I wouldn't have this weapon today. They hadn't seen or heard any soldiers since dawn. Milva led the way, riding far ahead of the rest of the company. Regis, Dandelion and Kaia were talking. I just hope those druids will deign to help us find Ciri, the poet said worriedly. I've met druids, and believe me, they are uncooperative, tight-lipped, unfriendly, eccentric recluses. They might not talk to us at all, far less use magic to help us. Regis knows one of the druids from Kaidu, the witcher reminded them. Are you sure the friendship doesn't go back 3 or 4 centuries? It's considerably more recent than that, the vampire assured them, with a mysterious smile. Anyhow, druids enjoy longevity. They're always out in the open, in the bosom of primordial and unpolluted nature, which has a marvellous effect on the health. Breathe deeply, Dandelion. Fill your lungs with forest air, and you'll be healthy too.
I'll soon grow fur in this bloody wilderness, Dandelion said sneeringly. When I sleep, I dream of inns, drinks, and bathhouses. A primordial pox on this primordial nature. I really have my doubts about its miraculous effect on the health, particularly mental health. The said druids are the best example because they're eccentric madmen. They're fanatical about nature and protecting it. I've witnessed them petitioning the authorities more times than I care to remember. Don't hunt, don't cut down trees, don't empty cesspits into rivers and other similar codswallop. And the height of idiocy was the visit of a delegation all arrayed in mistletoe wreaths to the court of King Ethin in Sidaris. I happened to be there. What did they want? Geralt asked, curious. Sidaris, as you know, is a kingdom where most people make a living from fishing. The druids demanded that the king order the use of nets with mesh of a specific size, and harshly punish anyone who used finer nets than instructed. Ethin's jaw dropped, and the mistletoers explained that limiting the size of mesh was the only way to protect fish stocks from depletion. The king led them out onto the terrace, pointed to the sea, and told them how his bravest sailor had once sailed westwards for 2 months, and only returned because supplies of fresh water had run out on his vessel, and there still wasn't a sign of land on the horizon. Could the druids, he asked, imagine the fish stocks in a sea like that being exhausted? By all means, the mistletoers confirmed, for though there was no doubt sea fishery would endure the longest as a means of acquiring food directly from nature, the time would come when fish would run out and hunger would stare them all in the face. Then it would be absolutely necessary to fish using nets with large mesh to only catch fully grown specimens and protect the small fry. Ethin asked when, in the druids' opinion, this dreadful time of hunger would occur, and they said in about 2,000 years, according to their forecasts. The king bade them a courteous farewell and requested that they drop by in around 1,000 years when he would think it over. The mistletoers didn't get the joke and began to protest, so they were thrown out. They're like that, those druids, Caia agreed. Back home in Niflgaard. Got you! Dandelion said triumphantly. Back home in Niflgaard. Only yesterday, when I called you a Nilfgaardian, you leapt up as though you'd been stung by a hornet. Perhaps you could finally decide who you are, Caia. To you, Caia said, shrugging. I have to be a Nilfgaardian, for as I see, nothing will convince you otherwise. However, for the sake of precision, please know that in the Empire, such a title is reserved exclusively for indigenous residents of the capital and its closest environs, lying by the lower reaches of the Alba. My family originates in Vicovaro, and thus— Shut your traps! Milva commanded abruptly, and not very politely from the vanguard. They all immediately fell silent and reined in their horses, having learned by now that it was a sign the girl had seen, heard, or instinctively sensed something edible, provided it could be stalked and shot with an arrow. Milva had indeed raised her bow to shoot, but had not dismounted. That meant it was not about food. Geralt approached her cautiously. Smoke, she said bluntly. I can't see it. Sniff it, then. The archer's sense of smell had not deceived her, even though the scent of smoke was faint. It couldn't have been the smoke from the conflagration behind them. This smoke, Geralt observed, smells nice. It's coming from a campfire on which something is being roasted. Do we steer clear of it? Milva asked quietly. After we've taken a look, he replied, dismounting from his mare and handing the reins to Dandelion. It will be good to know what we're steering clear of, and who we have behind us. Come with me, Maria. The rest of you stay in your saddles. Be vigilant. From the brush at the edge of the forest unfolded a view of a vast clearing, with logs piled up in even cords of wood. A very thin ribbon of smoke rose from between the wood piles. Geralt calmed down somewhat, as nothing was moving in his field of vision, and there was too little space between the wood piles for a large group to be hiding there. Milva shared his opinion. No horses, she whispered. They aren't soldiers. Woodmen, I'd say. Me too, but I'll go and check. Cover me. When he approached, cautiously picking his way around the piles of logs, he heard voices. He came closer, and was absolutely amazed, but his ears hadn't let him down. Half a contract in diamonds. Small slamming diamonds. Barrow. Pass. Your lead. Show your hand. Cards on the table. What the? Just a knave and some low numbers. Got you right where it hurts. I'll make you suffer before you get a small slam. We'll see about that. My knave? What? It's been taken? Hey, Jason, you really got fucked over. Why didn't you play the lady, shithead? Pshaw, I ought to take my rod to you.
The Witcher, perhaps, might still have been cautious. After all, various different individuals could have been playing barrel, and many people might have been called Jason. However, a familiar hoarse squawking interrupted the card players' excited voices.
Ah, me!
"Hello, boys," Geralt said, emerging from behind the woodpile. "I'm delighted to see you, particularly as you're at full force again, including the parrot."
Bloody hell!
Zoltan Shive said, dropping his cards in astonishment, then quickly leaping to his feet, so suddenly that Field Marshal Windbag, who was sitting on his shoulder, fluttered his wings and shrieked in alarm.
The Witcher, as I live and breathe, or is it a mirage? Percival, do you see what I see?
Percival Schuttenbach, Munro Bruys, Jason Varda, and Figgis Maluzzo surrounded Geralt and seriously strained his right hand with their iron-hard grips, and when the rest of the company emerged from behind the logs, the shouts of joy increased accordingly.
Milva! Regis!
Zoltan shouted, embracing them all.
Dandelion, alive and kicking, even if your skull's bandaged. And what do you say, you bloody busker, about this latest melodramatic banality? Life, it turns out, isn't poetry, and you know why? Because it's so resistant to criticism.
"Where's Caleb Stratton?" Dandelion asked, looking around. Zoltan and the others fell silent and grew solemn.
"Caleb,"
the dwarf finally said, sniffing, "is sleeping in a birchwood, far from his beloved peaks and Mount Carbon. When the blacks overwhelmed us by the Einar, his legs were too slow, and he didn't make it to the forest. He caught a sword across the head, and when he fell, they dispatched him with bear spears."
"But, come on, cheer up, we've already mourned him and that'll do. We ought to be cheerful. After all, you got out of the madness in the camp in one piece. Why, the company's even grown, I see."
Kair inclined his head a little under the dwarf's sharp gaze, but said nothing.
"Come on, sit you down," Zoltan invited. "We're roasting a lamb here. We happened upon it a few days ago, lonely and sad. We stopped it from dying a miserable death from hunger or in a wolf's maw by slaughtering it mercifully and turning it into food. Sit down. And I'd like a few words with you, Regis, and Geralt, if you would."
2 women were sitting behind the woodpile. One of them, who was suckling an infant, turned away in embarrassment at the sight of them approaching. Nearby, a young woman with an arm wrapped in none-too-clean rags was playing with 2 children on the sand. As soon as she raised her misty, blank eyes to him, the Witcher recognized her.
"We untied her from the wagon, which was already in flames," the dwarf explained. "It almost finished the way that priest wanted. You know, the one who was after her blood. She passed through a baptism of fire nonetheless. The flames were licking at her, scorching her to the raw flesh. We dressed her wounds as well as we could. We covered her in lard, but it's a bit messy. Barber surgeon, if you would. Right away."
When Regis tried to peel off the dressing, the girl whimpered, retreating and covering her face with her good hand. Geralt approached to hold her still, but the vampire gestured him to stop. He looked deeply into the girl's vacant eyes, and she immediately calmed down and relaxed. Her head drooped gently on her chest. She didn't even flinch when Regis carefully peeled off the dirty rag and smeared an intense and strange-smelling ointment on her burnt arm. Geralt turned his head, pointed with his chin at the 2 women and the 2 children, and then bored his eyes into the dwarf. Zoltan cleared his throat. "We came across the 2 young'uns and the women here in Angren," he explained in hushed tones. "They got lost during their escape. They were alone, fearful and hungry, so we took them on board and were looking after them. It just seemed to happen." "It just seemed to happen," Geralt echoed, smiling faintly. "You're an incorrigible altruist, Zoltan Shive. We all have our faults. I mean, you're still determined to rescue your girl." "Indeed. Although it's become more complicated than that." "Because of that Nilfgaardian who was tracking you and has now joined the company?" "Partly." "Zoltan, where are those fugitives from? Who are they fleeing? Nilfgaard or the squirrels?" "Hard to say. The kids know bugger all. The women aren't too talkative and get upset for no reason at all. If you swear near them or fart, they go as red as beetroots. Never mind. But we've met other fugitives, woodmen, and they say the Nilfgaardians are prowling around here. It's our old friends, probably, the troop that came from the west, from across the Einar. But apparently there are also units here that arrived from the south, from across the Yaruga."
And who are they fighting? It's a mystery. The woodman talked of an army being commanded by a white queen or some such. That queen's fighting the blacks. It said she and her army are even venturing onto the far bank of the Yoruga, taking fire and sword to imperial lands. What army could that be? No idea, Zoltan said, and scratched an ear. See, every day some company or other comes through, messing up the tracks with their hooves. We don't ask who they are, we just hide in the bushes. Regis, who was dealing with the burns on the girl's arm, interrupted their conversation. The dressing must be changed daily, he said to the dwarf. I'll leave you the ointment and some gauze, which won't stick to the burns. Thank you, barber surgeon. Her arm will heal, the vampire said softly, looking at the witcher. With time, the scar will even vanish from her young skin. What's happening in the poor girl's head is worse, though. My ointments can't cure that. Geralt said nothing. Regis wiped his hands on a rag. It's a curse, he said in hushed tones, to be able to sense a sickness, the entire essence of it, in the blood, but not be able to treat it. Indeed, Zoltan sighed. Patching up the skin is one thing, but when the mind's addled, you're helpless. All you can do is give a damn and look after them. Thank you for your aid, barber surgeon. I see you've also joined the witch's company. It just seemed to happen. Zoltan said, and stroked his beard. And which way will you head in search of Ciri? We're heading east to Kaidu, to the Druid's Circle. We're counting on the Druid's help. No help, said the girl with the bandaged arm, in a ringing, metallic voice. No help, only blood, and a baptism of fire. Fire purifies but also kills. Zoltan was dumbfounded. Regis gripped his arm tightly and gestured him to remain silent. Geralt, who could recognize a hypnotic trance, said nothing and did not move. He who has spilt blood, and he who has drunk blood, the girl said, her head still lowered, shall pay in blood. Within 3 days one shall die in the other, and something shall die in each. They shall die, inch by inch, piece by piece. And when finally the iron-shod clogs wear out, and the tears dry, then the last shreds will pass. Even that which never dies shall die. Speak on, Regis said softly and gently. What can you see? Fog. A tower in the fog. It is the Tower of Swallows, on a lake bound by ice. What else do you see? Fog. What do you feel? Pain. Regis had no time to ask another question. The girl jerked her head, screamed wildly, and whimpered. When she raised her eyes, there really was nothing but fog in them. Zoltan, Geralt recalled, still running his fingers over the rune-covered blade. Started to respect Regis more after that incident, altogether dropping the familiar tone he normally used in conversations with the barber surgeon. Regis requested they did not say a single word to the others about the strange incident. The Witcher was not too concerned about it. He had seen similar trances in the past, and tended towards the view that the ravings of people under hypnosis were not prophecy, but the regurgitation of thoughts they had intercepted, and the suggestions of the hypnotist. Of course, in this case it was not hypnosis, but a vampire spell, and Geralt mused over what else the girl might have picked up from Regis's mind, had the trance lasted any longer. They marched with the dwarves and their charges for half a day. Then Zoltan Chive stopped the procession and took the Witcher aside. It's time to part company, he declared briefly. We have made a decision, Geralt. Mahakam is looming up to the north, and this valley leads straight to the mountains. We've had enough adventures. We're going back home, to Mount Carbon. I understand. It's nice that you want to understand. I wish you and your company luck. It's a strange company, if you don't mind me saying so. They want to help, the Witcher said softly. That's something new for me, which is why I've decided not to inquire into their motives. That's wise, Zoltan said, removing the dwarven scythe in its lacquered scabbard, wrapped in catskins, from his back. Here you go. Take it, before we go our separate ways. Zoltan, don't say anything, just take it. We'll sit out the war in the mountains. We have no need of hardware.
But it'll be pleasant to recall from time to time that this Mahakam-forged sile is in safe hands and whistles in a just cause, that it won't bring shame on itself. And when you use the blade to slaughter your Ciri's persecutors, take one down for Caleb Stratton, and remember Zoltan Chive and the Dwarven Forges. You can be certain I will, Geralt said, taking the sword and slinging it across his back. You can be certain I'll remember. In this rotten world, Zoltan Chive, goodness, honesty, and integrity become deeply engraved in the memory. That is true, the dwarf said, narrowing his eyes, which is why I won't forget about you and the marauders in the forest clearing, nor about Regis and the horseshoe in the coals. While we're talking about reciprocity. He broke off, coughed, hawked, and spat. Geralt, we robbed a merchant near Dillingen, a wealthy man who got rich as a hawker. We waylaid him after he'd loaded his golden jewels onto a wagon and fled the city. He defended his property like a lion and was yelling for help, so we took a few blows of an axe butt to the pate and became as quiet as a lamb. Do you remember the chest we lugged along, then carried on the wagon, and finally buried in the earth by the River O? Well, it contained his goods, stolen loot, which we intend to build our future on. Why are you telling me this, Sultan? Because I reckon you were still being misled by false appearances not so long ago. What you took for goodness and integrity was rottenness hidden under a pretty mask. You're easy to deceive, Witcher, because you don't look into motives. But I don't want to deceive you. So don't look at those women and children. Don't take the dwarf who's standing in front of you as virtuous and noble. Before you stands a thief, a robber, and possibly even a murderer. Because I can't be certain the hawker we roughed up didn't die in the ditch by the Dillingen highway. A lengthy silence followed, as they both looked northwards at the distant mountains enveloped in clouds. Farewell, Zoltan, Geralt finally said. Perhaps the forces, the existence of which I'm slowly becoming convinced about, will permit us to meet again one day. I hope our paths cross again. I'd like to introduce Ciri to you. I'd like her to meet you. But even if it never happens, know that I won't forget you. Farewell, dwarf. Will you shake my hand? Me? A thief and a thug? Without hesitation. Because I'm not as easy to deceive as I once was. Although I don't inquire into people's motives, I'm slowly learning the art of looking beneath masks. Geralt swung the scythe and bisected a moth that was flying past. After parting with Zoltan and his group, he recalled, we happened upon a group of wandering peasants in the forest. Some of them took flight on seeing us, but Milva stopped a few by threatening them with their bow. The peasants, it turned out, had been captives of the Niflgaardians not long before. They had been forced to fell cedar trees, but a few days ago their guards had been attacked and overcome by a unit of soldiers who freed them. Now they were going home. Dandelion insisted they describe their liberators. He pushed them aggressively and asked sharp questions. Those soldiers, the peasant repeated, they served the White Queen. They're giving the Black Infantry a proper hiding. They said they're carrying out baboon attacks on the enemy's rear lines. What? I'm telling you, aren't I? Baboon attacks. Bollocks to those baboons, Dandelion said, grimacing and waving a hand. Good people, I asked you what banners the army were bearing. Divers ones, sire, mainly cavalry, and the infantry were wearing something crimson. The peasant picked up a stick and described a rhombus in the sand. A lozenge, Dandelion, who was well versed in heraldry, said in astonishment. Not the Temerian lily, but a lozenge. Rivia's coat of arms. Interesting. It's 200 miles from here to Rivia, not to mention the fact that the armies of Lyria and Rivia were utterly annihilated during the fighting in Dol Angra and at Aldersburg, and Niflgaard has since occupied the country. I don't understand any of this. That's normal, the Witcher interrupted. Enough talking. We need to go. Ha! The poet cried. He had been pondering and analysing the information extracted from the peasants the whole time. I've got it! Not baboons, guerrillas! Partisans, do you see? We see, Kaia nodded. In other words, a Nordling partisan troop is operating in the area. A few units probably formed from the remains of the Lyrian and Rivian armies, which were defeated at Aldersburg in the middle of July. I heard about that battle while I was with the squirrels. I consider the news heartening, Dandelion declared, proud he'd been able to solve the mystery of the baboons.
Even if the peasants had confused the heraldic emblems, we don't seem to be dealing with the Temerian army. And I don't think news has reached the Rivian guerrillas about the 2 spies who recently cheated Marshal Visigurd's gallows. Should we happen upon those partisans, we have a chance to lie our way out of it.
Yes, we have a chance, Geralt agreed, calming the frolicking roach. But to be honest, I prefer not to try our luck.
But they're your countrymen, Witcher, Regis said. I mean, they call you Geralt of Rivia.
Slight correction, he replied coldly. I call myself that to make my name sound fancier. It's an addition that inspires more trust in my clients.
I see, the vampire said, smiling. And why exactly did you choose Rivia?
I drew sticks, marked with various grand-sounding names. My Witcher preceptor suggested that method to me, although not initially. Only after I'd insisted on adopting the name Geralt Roger Eric de Hort-Bellegarde. Vesemir thought it was ridiculous, pretentious, and idiotic. I dare say he was right.
Dandelion snorted loudly, looking meaningfully at the vampire and the Nilfgaardian. My full name, Regis said, a little piqued by the look, is authentic and in keeping with vampire tradition.
Mine too, Kaer hurried to explain. Maur is my mother's given name, and Dyferin my great-grandfather's, and there's nothing ridiculous about it, poet. And what's your name, by the way? Dandelion must be a pseudonym.
I can neither use nor betray my real name, the bard replied mysteriously, proudly putting on airs. It's too celebrated.
It always sorely annoyed me, added Milva, who, after being silent and gloomy for a long while, had suddenly joined in the conversation, when I was called pet names like Maya, Manya, or Marilka. When someone hears a name like that, they always think they can pinch a girl's behind.
It grew dark. The cranes flew off, and their trumpeting faded into the distance. The breeze blowing from the hills subsided. The Witcher sheathed the sail.
It was only this morning. This morning. And all hell broke loose in the afternoon. We should have suspected earlier, he thought. But which of us, apart from Regis, knew anything about this kind of thing? Naturally, everyone noticed that Milva often vomited at dawn, but we all ate grub that turned our stomachs. Dandelion puked once or twice too, and on one occasion Kaye got the run so badly he feared it was dysentery. And the fact that the girl kept dismounting and going into the bushes, well, I took it as a bladder infection. I was an ass. I think Regis realised the truth, but he kept quiet. He kept quiet until he couldn't keep quiet any longer. When we stopped to make camp in a deserted woodman's shack, Milva led him into the forest, spoke to him at length, and at times in quite a loud voice. The vampire returned from the forest alone. He brewed up and mixed some herbs, and then, abruptly, summoned us all to the shack. He began rather vaguely, in his annoying, patronising manner.
I'm addressing all of you, Regis said. We are, after all, a fellowship, and bear collective responsibility. The fact that the one who bears ultimate responsibility, direct responsibility, so to speak, is probably not with us, doesn't change anything. Spit it out, Dandelion said, irritated. Fellowship? Responsibility? What's the matter with Milva? What's she suffering from?
She's not suffering from anything, Kaye said softly.
At least, not strictly speaking, Regis added. Milva's pregnant.
Kaye nodded to show it was as he suspected.
Dandelion, however, was dumbstruck. Geralt bit his lip.
How far gone is she?
She declined, quite rudely, to give any dates at all, including the date of her last period. But I'm something of an expert. The 10th week.
Then refrain from your pompous appeals to direct responsibility, Geralt said somberly. It's not one of us. If you had any doubts at all in this regard, I hereby dispel them. You were absolutely right, however, to talk about collective responsibility. She's with us now. We have suddenly been promoted to the role of husbands and fathers. So let's listen carefully to what the physician says.
Wholesome, regular meals.
Regis began to list.
No stress, sufficient sleep, and soon the end of horseback riding.
They were all quiet for a long time.
We hear you, Regis, Dandelion finally said. My fellow husbands and fathers, we have a problem.
It's a bigger problem than you think, the vampire said, or a lesser one. It all depends on one's point of view. I don't understand.
Well, you ought to, Kaia muttered.
She demanded, Regis began a short while later, that I prepare and give her a strong and powerful medicament. She considers it a remedy for the problem. Her mind is made up. And have you?
Regis smiled.
Without talking to the other fathers?
The medicine she's requesting, Kaia said quietly, isn't a miraculous panacea. I have 3 sisters, so I know what I'm talking about. She thinks, it seems to me, that she'll drink the decoction in the evening, and the next morning she'll ride on with us. Not a bit of it. For about 10 days, there won't be a chance of her even sitting on a horse. Before you give her that medicine, Regis, you have to tell her that. And we can only give her the medicine after we've found a bed for her, a clean bed.
I see, Regis said, nodding. One voice in favour. What about you, Geralt?
What about me?
Gentlemen, the vampire swept across them with his dark eyes. Don't pretend you don't understand.
In Niflgaard, Kaia said, blushing and lowering his head, the woman decides. No one has the right to influence her decision. Regis said that Milva is certain she wants the medicament. Only for that reason, absolutely only for that reason, have I begun, in spite of myself, to think of it as an established fact, and to think about the consequences. But I'm a foreigner, who doesn't know. I ought not to get involved. I apologize.
What for? The troubadour asked, surprised. Do you think we're savages, Nilfgaardian? Primitive tribes, obeying some sort of shamanic taboo? It's obvious that only the woman can make a decision like that. It's her inalienable right. If Milva decides to—
Shut up, Dandelion, the Witcher snapped.
Please, shut up. You don't agree? The poet said, losing his temper. Are you planning to forbid her, or—
Shut your bloody mouth, or I won't be answerable for my actions. Regis, you seem to be conducting something like a poll among us. Why? You're the physician. The agent she's asking for. Yes, the agent. The word medicament doesn't suit me somehow. Only you can prepare and give her this agent, and you'll do it should she ask you for it again. You won't refuse.
I've already prepared the agent, Regis said, showing them all a little bottle made of dark glass. Should she ask again, I shall not refuse. Should she ask again, he repeated with force.
What's this all about, then? Unanimity? Total agreement? Is that what you were expecting?
You know very well what it's about, the vampire answered. You sense perfectly what ought to be done. But, since you ask, I shall tell you. Yes, Geralt, that's precisely what it's about. Yes, that's precisely what ought to be done. And no, it's not me that's expecting it. Could you be clearer? No, Dandelion, the vampire snapped. I can't be any clearer, particularly since there's no need. Right, Geralt?
Right, the Witcher said, resting his forehead on his clasped hands. Yes, too bloody right. But why are you looking at me? You want me to do it? I don't know how. I can't. I'm not suited for this role at all. Not at all, get it?
No, Dandelion interjected. I don't get it at all. Kaia, do you get it?
The Nilfgaardian looked at Regis and then at Geralt. I think I do, he said slowly. I think so.
Ah,
the troubadour said, nodding.
Ah, Geralt understood right away, and Kaia thinks he understands. I naturally demand to be enlightened, but first I'm told to be quiet, and then I hear there's no need for me to understand. Thank you. 20 years in the service of poetry, long enough to know there are things you either understand at once, even without words, or you'll never understand them. The vampire smiled. I don't know anyone, he said, who could have put it more elegantly. It was totally dark. The Witcher got to his feet.
It's now or never, he thought. I can't run away from it. There's no point putting it off. It's got to be done, and that's an end to it.
Milva sat alone by the tiny fire she had started in the forest,
in a pit left by a fallen tree, away from the woodman's shack where the rest of the company was sleeping. She didn't move when she heard his footsteps. It was as though she was expecting him. She just shifted along, making space for him on the fallen tree trunk. "Well," she said harshly, not waiting for him to say anything. "We're in a fix, aren't we, eh?" He didn't answer. "You didn't expect this when you set off, did you? When you let me join the company? You thought, so what if she's a peasant, a foolish country wench? You let me join. I won't be able to talk to her about brainy things on the road, you thought, but she might come in useful. She's a healthy, sturdy lass. She shoots a straight arrow. She won't get a sore arse from the saddle, and if it gets nasty, she won't shit her britches. She'll come in useful. And it turns out she's no use. Just a hindrance, a millstone, a typical bloody woman." "Why did you come after me?" he asked softly. "Why didn't you stay in Brokilon? You must have known." "I did," she interrupted. "I mean, I was with the Dryads. They always know what's wrong with a girl. You can't keep anything secret from them. They realise quicker than me. But I never thought I'd start feeling poorly so soon. I thought I'd drink some ergot or some other decoction, and you wouldn't even notice, wouldn't even guess. It's not that simple. I know. The vampire told me. I spent too long dragging my feet, meditating, hesitating. Now it won't be so easy." "That's not what I meant." "Bollocks," she said a moment later. "Imagine this. I had more than one string to me bow. I saw how Dandelion puts on a brave face, but thought him weak, soft, not used to hardship. I was just waiting for him to give up, and then we'd have to offload him. I thought, if it got hard, I'd go back with Dandelion. Now just look. Dandelion's the hero, and I'm—" Her voice suddenly cracked. Geralt embraced her, and he knew at once it was the gesture she had been waiting for, which she needed more than anything else. The roughness and hardness of the Brokilon archer disappeared just like that, and what remained was the trembling, gentle softness of a frightened girl. But it was she who interrupted the lengthening silence. "And that's what you told me, in Brokilon, that I would need a shoulder to lean on, that I would call out in the darkness. You're here. I can feel your arm next to mine. And I still want to scream. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Why are you trembling?" "It's nothing. A memory." "What will become of me?" He didn't answer. The question wasn't meant for him. "Daddy once showed me. Where I come from, there's a black wasp that lives by the river and lays its eggs in a live caterpillar. The young wasps hatch and eat the caterpillar alive, from the inside. Something like that's in me now. In me, inside me, in my own belly. It's growing. It keeps growing, and it's going to eat me, alive. Milva. Maria! I'm Maria, not Milva. What kind of red kite am I? A mother hen with an egg, not a kite. Milva laughed with the Dryads on the battleground, pulled arrows from blooded corpses. Waste of a good arrow shaft or a good arrowhead. And if someone was still breathing, a knife across the throat. Milva was treacherous. She led those people to their fate and laughed. Now their blood calls. That blood, like a wasp's venom, is devouring Maria from the inside. Maria is paying for Milva." He remained silent, mainly because he didn't know what to say. The girl snuggled up closer against his shoulder. "I was guiding a commando to Brokilon," she said softly. "It was in Burnt Stump, in June, on the Sunday before summer solstice. We were chased. There was a fight. 7 of us escaped on horseback. 5 elves, 1 she-elf, and me. About half a mile to the ribbon, but the cavalry were behind us and in front of us. Darkness all around, swamps, bogs. At night we hid in the willows. We had to let ourselves and the horses rest. Then the she-elf undressed without a word, lay down, and the first elf lay with her. It froze me. I didn't know what to do. Move away or pretend I couldn't see.
blood was pounding in my temples, but I heard it when she said, "Who knows what tomorrow will bring? Who will cross the ribbon and who will perish? En Samina. En Samina. A little love. Only this way," she said, "can death be overcome. Death or fear." They were afraid. She was afraid. I was afraid. So I undressed too and lay down nearby. I placed a blanket under my back. When the first one embraced me, I clenched my teeth, for I wasn't ready. I was terrified and dry. But he was wise, an elf after all. He only seemed young. Wise. Tender. He smelled of moss, grass and dew. I held my arms out towards the second one myself, desiring a little love. The devil only knows how much love there was in it and how much fear, but I'm certain there was more fear. For the love was fake. Perhaps well faked, but fake even so, like a pantomime, where if the actors are skilled, you soon forget what's play acting and what's the truth. But there was fear. There was real fear.
Geralt remained silent.
Nor did we manage to defeat death. They killed 2 of them at dawn, before we reached the bank of the ribbon. Of the 3 who survived, I never saw any of them again. My mother always told me a wench knows whose fruit she's bearing. But I don't know. I didn't even know the names of those elves, so how could I tell? How?
He said nothing. He let his arms speak for him.
And anyway, why do I need to know? The vampire will soon have the draft ready. The time will come for me to be left in some village or other. No, don't say a word, be silent. I know what you're like. You won't even give up that skittish mare. You won't leave her. You won't exchange her for another, even though you keep threatening to. You aren't the kind that leaves others behind. But now you have no choice. After I drink it, I won't be able to sit in the saddle. But know this. When I've recovered, I'll set off after you. For I would like you to find your Ciri Witcher, to find her and get her back with my help.
So that's why you rode after me, he said, wiping his forehead. That's why. She lowered her head. That's why you rode after me, he repeated. You set off to help rescue someone else's child. You wanted to pay off a debt that you intended to incur even when you set off. Someone else's child for your own. A life for a life. And I promised to help you should you be in need. But Milva, I can't help you. Believe me, I cannot. This time she remained silent, but he could not. He felt compelled to speak. Back there in Brokilon, I became indebted to you and swore I'd repay you, unwisely, stupidly. You offered me help in a moment when I needed help very much. There's no way of paying off a debt like that. It's impossible to repay something that has no price. Some say everything in the world, everything, with no exception, has a price. It's not true. There are things with no price, things that are priceless. But you realize it belatedly. When you lose them forever, and nothing can get them back for you. I have lost many such things, which is why I can't help you today.
But you have helped me, she replied, very calmly. You don't even know how you've helped me. Now, go, please. Leave me alone. Go away, Witcher, go, before you destroy my whole world.
When they set off again at dawn, Milva rode at the head, calm and smiling. And when Dandelion, who was riding behind her, began to strum away on his lute, she whistled the melody. Geralt and Rages brought up the rear. At a certain moment, the vampire glanced at the Witcher, smiled and nodded in acknowledgement and admiration. Without a word.
Then he took a small bottle of dark glass out of his medical bag and showed it to Geralt. Regis smiled again and threw the bottle into the bushes. The Witcher said nothing. When they stopped to water the horses, Geralt led Regis away to a secluded place. "A change of plans," he informed briefly. "We aren't going through Ysgith." The vampire remained silent for a moment, boring into him with his black eyes.
"Had I not known," he finally said, "that as a witcher you are only afraid of real hazards, I should have thought you were worried by the preposterous chatter of a deranged girl."
"But you do know, and you're sure to be guided by logic."
"Indeed. However, I should like to draw your attention to two matters. Firstly, Milva's condition, which is neither an illness nor a disability. The girl must, of course, take care of herself, but she is utterly healthy and physically fit. I would even say more than fit. The hormones—"
"Drop the patronizing superior tone," Geralt interrupted, "because it's getting on my nerves."
"That was the first matter of the two I intended to bring up," Regis continued. "Here's the second. When Milva notices your overprotectiveness, when she realizes you're making a fuss and mollycoddling her, she'll be furious. And then she'll feel stressed, which is absolutely inadvisable for her. Geralt, I don't want to be patronizing. I want to be rational."
Geralt did not answer.
"There's also a third matter," Regis added, still watching the Witcher carefully. "We aren't being compelled to go through Ysgith by enthusiasm or the lust for adventure, but by necessity. Soldiers are roaming the hills, and we have to make it to the Druids in Caid-dhu. I understood it was urgent, that it was important for you to acquire the information and set off to rescue your Ciri as quickly as possible."
"It is," Geralt said, looking away. "It's very important to me. I want to rescue Ciri and get her back. Until recently, I thought I'd do it at any price. But no, I won't pay that price. I won't consent to taking that risk. We won't go through Ysgith."
"The alternative?"
"The far bank of the Yaruga. We'll go upstream, far beyond the swamps, and we'll cross the Yaruga again near Caid-dhu. If it turns out to be difficult, only the two of us will meet the Druids. I'll swim across and you'll fly over as a bat. Why are you staring at me like that? I mean, rivers being obstacles to vampires is another myth and superstition. Or perhaps I'm wrong."
"No, you're not wrong. But I can only fly during a full moon, not at any other time."
And that's only 2 weeks away. When we reach the right place, it'll almost be full moon."
"Geralt," the vampire said, still not taking his eyes away from the Witcher, "you're a strange man. To make myself clear, I wasn't being critical. Right then. We give up on Ysgith, which is dangerous for a woman with child. We cross to the far bank of the Yaruga, which you consider safer.
I'm capable of assessing the level of risk.
I don't doubt it."
"Not a word to Milva or the others. Should they ask, it's part of our plan."
"Of course. Let us begin to look for a boat."
They didn't have to look for long, and the result of their search surpassed their expectations. They didn't find just a boat, but a ferry boat. Hidden among the willows, craftily camouflaged with branches and bunches of bulrushes, it was betrayed by the painter connecting it to the left bank. The ferryman was also found. While they were approaching, he quickly hid in the bushes, but Milva spotted him and dragged him from the undergrowth by the collar. She also flushed out his helper, a powerfully built fellow with the shoulders of an ogre and the face of an utter simpleton. The ferryman shook with fear, and his eyes darted around like a couple of mice in an empty granary.
"To the far bank,"
he whined, when he found out what they wanted.
"Not a chance. That's Niflgaardian territory, and there's a war on. They'll catch us and stuck us on a pike. I'm not going. You can kill me, but I'm not going."
"We can kill you," Milva said, grinding her teeth. "We can also beat you up first. Open your trap again, and you'll see what we can do."
"I'm sure the fact there's a war on," the vampire said, boring his eyes into the ferryman, "doesn't interfere with smuggling, does it, my good man? Which is what your ferry is for, after all, craftily positioned as it is, far from the royal and Niflgaardian toll collectors. Am I right? Go on, push it into the water."
That would be wise, Caer added, stroking his sword hilt. Should you hesitate, we shall cross the river ourselves without you, and your ferry will remain on the far bank. To get it back, you'll have to swim across doing the breaststroke. This way, you ferry us across and return. An hour of fear, and then you can forget all about it. But if you resist, you half-wit, Milver snapped, I'll give you such a beating you won't forget us till next winter. The ferryman yielded in the face of these hard, indisputable arguments, and soon the entire company was on the ferry. Some of the horses, particularly Roach, resisted and refused to go aboard, but the ferryman and his dopey helper used twitches made of sticks and rope. The skill with which they calmed the animals proved it was not the first time they had smuggled stolen mounts across the Yaruga. The giant simpleton got down to turning the wheel which drove the ferry, and the crossing began. When they reached the peaceful waters and felt the gentle breeze, their moods improved. Crossing the Yaruga was something new, a clear milestone, marking progress in their trek. In front of them was the Nilfgaardian bank, the frontier, the border. They all suddenly cheered up. It even affected the ferryman's foolish helper, who began to whistle an inane tune. Even Geralt was strangely euphoric, as though Ciri would emerge at any moment from the alder grove on the far bank and shout out joyfully on seeing him. Instead of that, the ferryman began shouting, and not joyfully in the least. "By the gods, we're done for!" Geralt looked towards where he was pointing and cursed. Suits of armour flashed, and hooves thudded among the alders on the high bank. A moment later, the jetty on the left bank was teeming with horsemen. "Black Riders!" the ferryman screamed, paling and releasing the wheel. "Nilfgaardians! Death! God save us!" "Hold the horses, Dandelion!" Milver yelled, trying to remove her bow from her saddle with one hand. "Hold the horses!" "They aren't Imperial forces," Caer said. "I don't think—" His voice was drowned out by the shouts of the horsemen on the jetty and the ferryman's yelling. Urged on by the yelling, the daft helper seized a hatchet, swung it, and brought the blade down powerfully on the rope. The ferryman came forward to help him with another hatchet. The horsemen on the jetty noticed it and also began to yell. Several of them rode into the water to seize the rope. Others began swimming towards the ferry. "Leave that rope alone!" Dandelion shouted. "It's not Nilfgaard! Don't cut it!" It was too late, however. The loose end of the rope sank heavily into the water. The ferry turned a little and began to float downstream. The horsemen on the bank started yelling. "Dandelion's right," Caer said grimly. "They aren't Imperial forces. They're on the Nilfgaardian bank, but it isn't Nilfgaard." "Of course they aren't," Dandelion called. "I recognize their livery, eagles and lozenges. It's Lyria's coat of arms. They're the Lyrian guerrillas. Hey, you men!" "Get down, you idiot!" The poet, as usual, rather than listening to the warning, wanted to know what it was all about. And right then, arrows whistled through the air. Some of them thudded into the side of the ferry. Some of them flew over the deck and splashed into the water. 2 flew straight for Dandelion, but the Witcher already had his sword in hand, leapt forward, and deflected both of them with swift blows. "By the great sun!" Caer grunted. "He deflected 2 arrows. Remarkable! I've never seen anything like it. And you never will again. That's the first time I've ever managed 2 in a row. Now get down, will you?" However, the soldiers by the jetty had stopped shooting, seeing the current pushing the drifting ferryboat straight towards their bank. Water foamed beside the horses, which had been driven into the river. The ferry station was filling up with more horsemen. There were at least 200 of them. "Help!" the ferryman yelled. "Seize the poles, my lords! We're being carried to the bank!" They understood at once, and fortunately there were plenty of poles. Regis and Dandelion held the horses, and Milver, Caer, and the Witcher aided the efforts of the ferryman and his duffer of an assistant. Pushed off by 5 poles, the ferryboat turned and began to move more quickly, clearly heading towards the midstream. The soldiers on the bank started yelling again and took up their bows once again. Again, several arrows whistled past, and one of their horses neighed wildly. The ferryboat, carried away by a more powerful current, was fortunately travelling quickly, and began to move further from the bank, beyond the range of an effective arrow shot. They were now floating in the middle of the river on calm waters. The ferryboat was spinning like a turd in an ice hole, and the horses stamped and whinnied, tugging at the reins which were being held by Dandelion and the vampire. The horsemen on the bank yelled and shook their fists at them. Geralt suddenly noticed a rider on a white steed among them, who was waving a sword and issuing orders. A moment later, the cavalcade withdrew into the forest and galloped along the edge of the high bank. Their armour flashed among the riverside undergrowth.
"They aren't letting us go," the ferryman groaned. "They know that the rapids round the corner will push us over towards the bank again. Keep those poles at the ready, my lords. When it turns towards the right bank, we'll have to help the old tub get the better of the current land, else we're doomed."
They floated, turning, drifting slightly towards the right bank. A steep, high bluff bristling with crooked pine trees. The left bank, the one that was moving away from them, had become flat and jutted into the river in a semicircular sandy spit. Horsemen galloped onto the spit, their momentum taking them into the water. By the spit there was clearly a sandbank channel, a shallow, and before the water had reached the height of the horses' bellies, the horsemen had ridden quite far into the river.
"We're in arrow range," Milver judged grimly. "Get down!"
Arrows began whistling again, and some of them thumped into the planks, but the current, pushing them away from the channel, quickly carried the ferryboat towards a sharp bend on the right.
"To the poles!" the trembling ferryman ordered. "With a will! Let's land before the rapids carry us away!"
It wasn't so easy. The current was swift, the water deep, and the ferryboat large, heavy, and cumbersome. At first it did not react to their efforts at all, but finally the poles found more purchase on the riverbed. It looked as though they might succeed, when Milver suddenly dropped her pole and pointed wordlessly at the right bank.
"This time," Kaya said, wiping sweat from his brow. "This time, it's definitely Niflgaard."
Geralt saw it too. The horsemen who had suddenly appeared on the right bank were wearing black and green cloaks, and the horses had typical Nilfgaardian blinders. There were at least 100 of them.
"Now we're done for," the ferryman whimpered. "Mother of mine, it's the Black Riders!"
"To the poles!" the Witcher roared. "To the poles and into the current, away from the bank!"
Once again it turned out to be a difficult task. The current by the right bank was powerful and pushed the ferryboat straight under the high bluff, from which the shouts of the Nilfgaardians could be heard. A moment later, when Geralt, who was leaning on his pole, looked upwards, he saw pine branches above his head. An arrow shot from the top of the bluff penetrated the ferryboat's deck almost vertically, 2 feet from him. He deflected another, which was heading for Caer, with a blow of his sword. Milver, Caer, the ferryman and his assistant pushed away, not from the riverbed, but from the bank where the bluff was. Geralt dropped his sword, caught up a pole and helped them, and the ferryboat began to drift towards the calm waters again. But they were still dangerously close to the right bank and to their pursuers galloping along the edge of it. Before they could move away, the bluff ended, and Nilfgaardians flooded onto the flat, reedy bank. Fletchings screamed through the air.
"Get down!"
The ferryman's helper suddenly coughed, strangely, dropping his pole into the water. Geralt saw a bloodied arrowhead and 4 inches of shaft sticking out of his back. Caer's chestnut reared, neighed in pain, jerking its penetrated neck, knocked Dandelion down, and leapt overboard. The remaining horses also neighed and thrashed, and the ferryboat shook from the impact of their hooves.
"Hold the horses!" the vampire yelled. "3—"
He suddenly broke off, fell backwards against the planks, and sat down with his head lolling. A black feathered arrow was sticking out of his chest. Milver saw it too. She screamed with fury, picked up her bow, knelt, and emptied the quiver of arrows right on the deck. Then she began to shoot, quickly, arrow after arrow. Not one missed its target. There was confusion on the bank, the Nilfgaardians retreating into the forest, leaving their dead and wounded in the reeds. Hidden in the undergrowth, they continued to shoot, but their arrows were barely reaching the ferryboat, which was being carried towards the midstream by the swift current. The distance was too great for the Nilfgaardian archers to shoot accurately, but not too great for Milver. Among the Nilfgaardians suddenly appeared an officer in a black cape and a helmet, with raven's wings flapping on it. He was yelling, brandishing a mace and pointing downstream. Milver stood, took a broader stance, pulled the bowstring to her ear, and quickly took aim. The arrow hissed in the air, and the officer bent backwards in his saddle, and sagged in the arms of the soldiers holding him up. Milver drew her bow again, and released her fingers from the bowstring. One of the Nilfgaardians holding up the officer screamed piercingly, and lurched back off his horse. The others disappeared into the forest.
"Masterful shots," Regis said calmly, from behind the witch's back. "But it'd be better if you grabbed the poles. We're still too close to the bank, and we're being carried into the shallows."
The archer and Geralt turned around.
"Aren't you dead?" they asked in chorus. "Did you think," the vampire said, showing them the black-fletched shaft, "I could be harmed by any old bit of wood?" There was no time to be surprised. The ferryboat was once again turning around in the current and moving along the calm waters. But on the bend in the river, another beach appeared, a sandbank and shallow channel, and the bank teemed with black-clad Nilfgaardians again. Some of them were riding into the river and preparing to shoot. Everyone, including Dandelion, rushed for the poles, which soon could not reach the bottom as, owing to the combined effort, the current finally carried the ferryboat towards swifter water.
"Good," Milva panted, dropping her pole. "Now they won't be able to reach us."
"One of them's made it to the sandbank," Dandelion cried. "He's going to shoot! Get out of sight!"
"He'll miss," Milva said coldly. The arrow splashed into the water, 2 yards from the ferryboat's bow.
"He's doing it again!"
the troubadour yelled, peeping out from above the saxboard.
"Look out!"
"He'll miss," Milva repeated, straightening the bracer on her left forearm. "He's got a good bow, but he's as much an archer as my old granny. He's overexcited. After he releases, he trembles and shakes like a woman with a slug wriggling up her arse. Hold on to the horses so I don't get knocked over." This time, the Nilfgaardian shot too high, and the arrow whistled over the ferryboat. Milva raised her bow, her stance firm, quickly pulled the bowstring to her cheek, and released it gently, not changing her position by even a fraction of an inch. The Nilfgaardian tumbled into the water as though struck by lightning, and began to float with the current. His black cape billowed out like a balloon. "That's how it's done," Milva said, and lowered her bow. "But it's too late for him to learn." "The others are galloping after us," Kaia said, pointing towards the right bank. "And I vouch they won't stop chasing us. Not now that Milva's shot their officer. The river's meandering, and the current will carry us towards their bank again on the next bend. They know it, and they'll be waiting."
"Right now we have another worry,"
the ferryman moaned, getting up from his knees and throwing off his dead helper.
"We're being pushed straight for the left bank. By the gods, we're caught between 2 fires, and all because of you, my lords. The blood will fall on your heads."
"Shut your trap and grab a pole." The flat left bank, which was now nearer, was teeming with horsemen, identified by Dandelion as Lyrian partisans. They were yelling and waving their arms. Geralt noticed a rider on a white horse among them. He wasn't certain, but he thought the rider was a woman, a fair-haired woman in armour, but without a helmet.
"What are they yelling?"
Dandelion said, straining to listen.
"Something about a queen, is it?"
The shouting on the left bank intensified. They could also hear the clanging of steel distinctly now. "It's a battle," Kaia said bluntly. "Look, those are Imperial forces running out of the forest. The Nordlings were fleeing from them, and now they've been caught in a trap." "The way out of the trap," Geralt said, spitting into the water, "was the ferry. I think they wanted to save at least their queen and their officers by ferrying them onto the other bank. And we hijacked the ferry. Oh, they won't like us now. No, no."
"But they ought to,"
Dandelion said.
"The ferry wouldn't have saved anyone, just carried them straight into the clutches of the Nilfgaardians on the right bank. Let's avoid the right bank too. We can parley with the Lyrians, but the blacks will beat us to death without a second thought."
"It's carrying us quicker and quicker," Milva said, spitting into the water too and watching her saliva drift away. "And right down the centre of the run. They could kiss our asses, both armies. The bends are gentle, the banks are level and overgrown with willows. We're heading down the Yaruga, and they won't catch up with us. They'll soon get bored."
"Bullshit," the ferryman groaned. "The red port is ahead of us. There's a bridge there, and shallows. The ferry will get stuck. If they overtake us, they'll be waiting for us."
"The Nordlings won't overtake us," Regis said, pointing at the left bank from the stern.
"They have their own worries."
Indeed, a fierce battle was raging on the right bank. Most of the fighting took place in the forest and only betrayed itself by battle cries, but here and there the black and colourfully uniformed horsemen were delivering blows to each other in the water near the bank. Bodies were splashing into the Yaruga. The tumult and clang of steel quietened, and the ferryboat, majestically but quite quickly, headed downstream. Finally, no soldiers could be seen on the overgrown banks, and no sounds of their pursuers could be heard. Only when Geralt was starting to hope everything would end well, did they see a wooden bridge spanning the 2 banks. The river flowed beneath the bridge,
past sandbars and islands, the largest of which supported the bridge's piers. On the right bank lay the timber port. They could see thousands of logs piled up there.
"It's shallow all around," the ferryman panted. "We can only get through the middle, to the right of the island. The current is carrying us there now, but grab the poles. They might help if we get stuck."
"There are soldiers on the bridge," Kair said, shielding his eyes with his hand. "On the bridge and in the port." They could all see the soldiers, and they all saw the band of horsemen in black and green cloaks flooding out of the forest behind the port. They were even close enough to hear the noise of battle. "Niflgaard," Kair confirmed dryly. "The men who are pursuing us. So the men in the port are Nordlings."
"To the poles!" the ferryman yelled. "Maybe we'll sneak through while they're fighting."
They did not manage to. They were very close to the bridge when it suddenly began to shake from the boots of running soldiers. The footmen were wearing white tunics, decorated with red lozenges over their hauberks. Most of them had crossbows, which they rested on the railing and aimed at the ferryboat approaching the bridge.
"Don't shoot, boys!" Dandelion yelled at the top of his voice. "Don't shoot! We're with you!"
The soldiers did not hear, or did not want to hear. The salvo of quarrels turned out to have tragic results. The only human to be hit was the ferryman, who was still trying to steer with his pole. A bolt pierced him right through. Kair, Milva, and Regis ducked down behind the side in time. Geralt seized his sword and deflected one quarrel, but there were too many of them. By an inexplicable miracle, Dandelion, who was still yelling and waving his arms, was not hit. However, the hail of missiles caused real carnage among the horses. The grey slumped to its knees, struck by 3 quarrels. Milva's black fell kicking. Regis's bay, too. Roach, shot in the withers, reared and leapt overboard.
"Don't shoot!" Dandelion bellowed. "We're with you!"
This time, it worked. The ferryboat, carried by the current, ploughed into a sandbank with a grinding sound and came to rest. They all jumped onto the island or into the water, escaping the hooves of the agonized, thrashing horses. Milva was the last, for her movements had suddenly become horrifyingly slow. "She's been hit," the Witcher thought, seeing the girl clambering clumsily over the side and dropping inertly on the sand. He leapt towards her, but the vampire was quicker. "Something's broken off in me," the girl said very slowly, and very unnaturally. And then she pressed her hands to her womb. Geralt saw the leg of her woolen trousers darkening with blood. "Pour that over my hands," Regis said, handing Geralt a small bottle he had removed from his bag. "Pour that over my hands, quickly." "What is it?" "She's miscarrying. Give me a knife. I have to cut open her clothes, and go away." "No," Milva said. I want him to stay." A tear trickled down her cheek. The bridge above them thundered with soldiers' boots.
"Geralt!"
Dandelion yelled. The Witcher, seeing what the vampire was doing to Milva, turned his head away in embarrassment. He noticed soldiers in white tunics rushing across the bridge at great speed. An uproar could still be heard from the right bank and the timber port.
"They're running away,"
Dandelion panted, running to him and tugging his sleeve.
"The Nilfgaardians are already on the right bridgehead. The battle is still raging there, but most of the army are fleeing to the left bank. Do you hear? We have to flee too."
"We can't," he said through clenched teeth. "Milva's miscarried. She can't walk." Dandelion swore.
"We'll have to carry her then," he declared. "It's our only chance."
"Not our only one," Kair said. "Geralt, onto the bridge." "What do you mean?" "We'll hold back their flight. If those Nordlings can hold the right bridgehead long enough, perhaps we'll be able to escape by the left one." "How do you plan to do it?" "I'm an officer, don't forget. Climb up that pier and onto the bridge." On the bridge, Kair demonstrated that he was indeed experienced at bringing panicked soldiers under control. "Where are you going, scum? Where are you going, bastards?" he yelled. Each roar was accompanied by a punch as he knocked a fleeing soldier down onto the bridge's boards. "Stop! Stop, you fucking swine!" Some, but far from all, of the fleeing soldiers stopped, terrified by the roaring and flashing of the sword Kair was whirling dramatically. Others tried to sneak behind his back, but Geralt had already drawn his sword and joined the spectacle. "Where are you going?" he shouted, catching one of the soldiers in his tracks in a powerful grip. "Where? Stand fast! Get back there!" "Nilfgaard, sire!"
the soldier screamed. "It's a bloodbath! Let me go!" "Cowards!" Dandelion roared in a voice Geralt had never heard as he clambered onto the bridge. "Base cowards! Chicken hearts! Would you flee to save your skins? To live out your days in ignominy, you varlets? There are too many tonight. We stand no chance." "The Centurion's fallen," another of them moaned. "The Decurions have taken flight. Death is coming. We must run." "Your comrades," Kai yelled, brandishing his sword, "are still fighting on the bridgehead and at the port. They are still fighting. Dishonour will be his who does not go to their aid. Follow me." "Dandelion," the Witcher hissed, "get down onto the island. You and Radius will have to get Milver onto the left bank somehow." "Well, what are you waiting for?" "Follow me, boys," Kai repeated, whirling his sword. "Follow me if the gods are dear to you. To the timber port. Death to the dogs." About a dozen soldiers shook their weapons and took up the cry, their voices expressing very varied degrees of conviction. About a dozen of the men who had already run away turned back in shame and joined the ragtag army on the bridge, an army which was suddenly being led by the Witcher and the Nilfgaardian. They might really have set off for the timber port, but the bridgehead was suddenly black with the cavalrymen's cloaks. The Nilfgaardians broke through the defence and forced their way onto the bridge. Horseshoes thudded on the planking. Some of the soldiers who had been stopped darted away. Others stood indecisively. Kair cursed in Nilfgaardian, but no one apart from the Witcher paid any attention to it. "What has been started must be finished," Geralt snapped, gripping his sword tightly. "Let's get them. We have to spur our men into action." "Geralt," Kair said, stopping and looking at him uncertainly. "Do you want me to kill my own?" I don't give a shit about this war," the Witcher said, grinding his teeth. "This is about Milver. You join the company, so make a choice. Follow me or join the Blackcloaks, but do it quickly." "I'm coming with you." And so it was that a Witcher and a Nilfgaardian roared savagely, whirled their swords, and leapt forward together without a second thought, two brothers in arms, two allies and comrades, in an encounter with their common foe, in an uneven battle. And that was their baptism of fire, a baptism of shared fighting, fury, madness, and death. They were going to their deaths, the two of them, or so they thought, for they could not know that they would not die that day on that bridge over the river Yaruga. They did not know that they were both destined for other deaths, in other places and times. The Nilfgaardians had silver scorpions embroidered on their sleeves. Kair slashed two of them with quick blows of his longsword, and Geralt cut up two more with blows of his scythe. Then he jumped onto the bridge's railing, running along it to attack the rest. He was a Witcher, and keeping his balance was a trifle to him, but his acrobatic feat astonished the attackers, and, amazed, they died, from blows of his dwarven blade, which cut through their hauberks as though they were made of wool, their blood splashing the bridge's polished timbers. Seeing their commander's valour, the now larger army on the bridge raised a cheer, a roar which expressed returning morale and a growing fighting spirit. And so it was that the previously panicked fugitives attacked the Nilfgaardians like fierce wolves, slashing with swords and battle-axes, stabbing with spears and halberds, and striking with clubs and maces. The railing broke, and horses plunged into the river with their black-cloaked riders. The roaring army hurtled onto the bridgehead, pushing their chance commanders ahead of them, not letting Geralt and Kair do what they wanted to do, for they wanted to withdraw quietly, return to help Milver, and flee to the left bank. A battle was still raging at the timber port. The Nilfgaardians had surrounded and cut off the soldiers, who had not yet fled, from the bridge. Those in turn were defending themselves ferociously behind barricades built from cedar and pine logs. At the sight of the reinforcements, the handful of soldiers raised a joyful cry. A little too hastily, however. The tight wedge of reinforcements swept the Nilfgaardians off the bridge, but now a flanking cavalry counterattack began on the bridgehead. Had it not been for the barricades and timber port's woodpiles, which inhibited both escape and the cavalry's momentum, the infantry would have been scattered in an instant. Pressed against the woodpiles, the soldiers took up a fierce fight. For Geralt, it was something he did not know, a completely new kind of fighting. Swordsmanship was out of the question. It was simply a chaotic melee. a ceaseless parrying of blows falling from every direction. However, he continued to take advantage of the rather undeserved privilege of being the commander. The soldiers crowded around him, covering his flanks, protecting his back, and cleared the area in front of him, creating space for him to strike and mortally wound. But it was becoming more and more cramped. The Witcher and his army found themselves fighting shoulder to shoulder with the bloody and exhausted handful of soldiers, mainly dwarven mercenaries, defending the barricade. They fought, surrounded on all sides. And then came fire. One side of the barricade, located between the timber port and the bridge, had been a huge pile of pine branches, as spiky as a hedgehog, an unsurmountable obstacle to horses and infantry. Now that pile was on fire. Someone had thrown a burning brand into it. The defenders retreated, assaulted by flames and smoke. Crowded together, blinded, hampering each other, they began to die under the blows of the attacking Nilfgaardians. Cair saved the day. Making use of his military experience, he did not allow the soldiers gathering around him on the barricade to be surrounded. He had been cut off from Geralt's group, but was now returning. He had even managed to acquire a horse in a black caparison, and now, hacking in all directions with his sword, he charged at the flank. Behind him, yelling wildly, halberdiers and spearmen in red lozenged tunics forced their way into the gap. Geralt put his fingers together and struck the burning pile with the Ard sign. He did not expect any great effect, since he had been forced to make do without his Witcher elixirs for several weeks, but he succeeded nonetheless. The pile of branches exploded and fell apart, showering sparks around. "Follow me!" he roared, slashing a Nilfgaardian's temple when the man was trying to push his way onto the barricade. "Follow me! Through the fire!" And so they set off, scattering the still burning pyre with their spears, throwing the flaming brands they had picked up with their bare hands at the Nilfgaardian horses. A baptism of fire, the Witcher thought, furiously striking and parrying blows. I was meant to pass through fire for Ciri, and I'm passing through fire in a battle which is of no interest to me at all, which I don't understand in any way. The fire that was meant to purify me is just scorching my hair and face. The blood he was splattered with hissed and steamed. "Onwards, comrades! Cair, to me!" "Geralt!" Cair shouted, sweeping another Nilfgaardian from the saddle. "To the bridge! Force your way through to the bridge! We'll close ranks!" He did not finish, for a cavalryman in a black breastplate, without a helmet, with flowing, bloodied hair, galloped at him. Cair parried a blow of the rider's longsword, but was thrown from his horse, which sat down on its haunches. The Nilfgaardian leant over to pin him to the ground with his sword, but he did not. He stayed his thrust. The silver scorpion on his breastplate flashed. "Cair?" he cried in astonishment. "Cair ep Ciailach?" "Mortisan." No less astonishment could be heard in the voice of Cair, spread-eagled on the ground. A dwarven mercenary running alongside Geralt in a blackened and charred tunic with a red lozenge didn't waste time being astonished by anything. He plunged his bear spear powerfully into the Nilfgaardian's belly, unseating the enemy with the impetus of the blow. Another leapt forward, stamping on the fallen cavalryman's black breastplate with a heavy boot, and thrust his spear's blade straight into his throat. The Nilfgaardian wheezed, puking blood, and raking the sand with his spurs. At the same moment, the Witcher received a blow in the base of his spine with something very heavy and very hard. His knees buckled beneath him. Falling, he heard a great, triumphant roar. He saw the horsemen in black cloaks fleeing into the trees. He heard the bridge thundering beneath the hooves of the cavalry arriving from the left bank, carrying a banner with an eagle surrounded by red lozenges. And thus, for Geralt, ended the great battle for the bridge on the Yaruga, a battle which later chroniclers did not, of course, even mention. "Don't worry, my lord," the field surgeon said, tapping and feeling the Witcher's back. "The bridge is down. We aren't in danger of being attacked from the other bank. Your comrades and the woman are also safe. Is she your wife?" "No." "Oh, and I thought... For it's always dreadful, sire, when pregnant women suffer in wars." "Be silent. Not a word about it. What are those banners?" "Don't you know who you were fighting for? Who would have thought such a thing were possible? That's the Lyrian army. See the black Lyrian eagle and the red Rivian lozenges. Good. I'm done here. It was only a bump. Your back will hurt a little, but it's nothing. You'll recover." "Thanks," I should be thanking you. Had you not held the bridge, Niflgaard would have slaughtered us on the far bank, forcing us back into the water. We wouldn't have been able to flee from them. You saved the Queen. Well, farewell, Zaya. I have to go. Others need me to tend to their wounds. Thanks. He sat on a log in the port, weary, sore, and apathetic. Alone. Caer had disappeared somewhere. The golden-green Yaruga flowed between the piers of the ruined bridge, sparkling in the light of the sun which was setting in the west. He raised his head, hearing steps, the clatter of horseshoes, and the clanking of armour. This is he, Your Majesty. Let me help you dismount. Stay away. Geralt lifted up his eyes. Before him stood a woman in a suit of armour, a woman with very pale hair, almost as pale as his own. He saw that the hair was not fair, but grey, although the woman's face did not bear the marks of old age. A mature age, indeed, but not old age. The woman pressed a batiste handkerchief with lace hems to her lips. The handkerchief was heavily blood-stained. "Rise, Zaya," one of the knights standing alongside whispered to Geralt, "and pay homage. It is the Queen." The Witcher stood up and bowed, overcoming the pain in his lower back. "Did you safeguard the bridge?" "I beg your pardon." The woman took the handkerchief away from her mouth and spat blood. Several red drops fell on her ornamented breastplate. "Her Royal Highness Meve, Queen of Lyria and Rivia," said a knight in a purple cloak, decorated with gold embroidery, standing beside the woman, "is asking if you led the heroic defence of the bridge on the Yaruga." "It just seemed to happen." "Seemed to happen?" the Queen said, trying to laugh, but not having much success. She scowled, swore foully, but indistinctly, and spat again. Before she had time to cover her mouth, he saw a nasty wound, and noticed she lacked several teeth. She caught his eye. "Yes," she said behind her handkerchief, looking him in the eye. "Some son of a bitch smacked me right in the face. A trifle." "Queen Meve," the knight in the purple cloak announced, "fought in the front line like a man, like a knight, opposing the superior forces of Niflgaard. The wound hurts but does not shame her, and you saved her and our corps. After some traitors had captured and hijacked the ferryboat, that bridge became our only hope, and you defended it valiantly." "Stop, Odo. What is your name, hero?" "Mine? Certainly," the knight in purple said, looking at him menacingly. "What is the matter with you? Are you wounded? Injured? Were you struck in the head?" "No." "Then answer the Queen. You see, do you not, that she is wounded in the mouth and has difficulty speaking?" "Stop that, Odo." The purple knight bowed and then glanced at Geralt. "Your name?" "Very well," he thought. "I've had enough of this. I will not lie." "Geralt." "Geralt from where?" "From nowhere." "Have no one bestowed a knighthood on you?" Meve asked, once more decorating the sand beneath her feet with a red splash of saliva mixed with blood. "I beg your pardon? No. Nobody has, Your Majesty." Meve drew her sword. "Kneel." He obeyed, still unable to believe what was happening. He was still thinking of Milva and the route he had chosen for her, fearing the swamps of Ysgith. The Queen turned to the purple knight. "You will speak the formula. I am toothless." "For outstanding valour in the fight for a just cause," the purple knight recited with emphasis, "for showing proof of virtue, honour and loyalty to the crown. I, Meve, by grace of the gods, the Queen of Lyria and Rivia, by my power, right and privilege, dub you a knight. Serve us faithfully. Bear this blow, shirk not away from pain." Geralt felt the touch of the blade on his shoulder. He looked into the Queen's pale green eyes. Meve spat thick red gore, pressed the handkerchief to her face, and winked at him over the lace. The purple knight walked over to her and whispered something. The Witcher heard the words predicate, Rivian lozenges, banner, and virtue. "That is so," Meve said, nodding. She spoke more and more clearly, overcoming the pain and sticking her tongue in the gap left by missing teeth. "You held the bridge with soldiers of Rivia, valiant Geralt of Nowhere. It just seemed to happen.
Well, it hath come to me to give you a predicate for that deed. Geralt of Rivia. Ha ha!
Bow, Sir Knight, the purple knight hissed. The freshly dubbed knight, Geralt of Rivia, bowed low, so that Queen Meve, his suzerain, would not see the bitter smile, that he was unable to resist.